becoming the school slut in the 7th grade, and being gay when your dad is a pastor. My name is Andrea, and this is Adult Child. Welcome back to Adult Child, where we take a deep dive into the impact of growing up in a dysfunctional family. And today, we are taking a deep dive into one of the most damaging repercussions that comes from growing up in a dysfunctional family: shame. But not just any kind of shame. The kind of shame you feel when you become the school slut in the 7th grade. Or the kind of shame you feel when you're gay and your dad is the pastor of an evangelical mega church. This is what we call toxic shame. And yes, you will be hearing both of those stories today. So before we dive into toxic shame, let's talk about regular old shame, the human emotion of shame, which is a painful feeling that arises when we have the awareness that we've done something dishonorable or improper. And while no one wants to feel shame, obviously, it is unfortunately a fundamental part of the human experience, and it's actually healthy to experience from time to time. Why do I say that? Well, first off, it lets us know that we aren't a sociopath, as sociopaths typically don't experience shame. So yay there. But more importantly, shame often serves as the catalyst to positive change in our lives. You see, shame is the red flag to self that we have acted out of alignment in a moral sense, that we have acted in a way that is not aligned with our integrity. Therefore, it reminds us of our essential limitations as humans, that we are not perfect, that we will make mistakes, and thus it presents us with an opportunity to grow and become better versions of ourselves. However, this ain't the case with toxic shame. You see, toxic shame is internalized shame. And when an emotion is internalized, it no longer functions as an emotion and it becomes one's identity. So once shame is internalized, it no longer is an emotion for that person. It is no longer an emotion that signals our essential limitations. It becomes a state of being, a core identity. And this is the core identity of an adult child. Our childhood experiences may vary, but what lies underneath is this all-pervasive sense, most often unconscious, that we are inherently flawed, that we are unlovable, that we are unworthy of connection. And having these sort of beliefs definitely do not serve as the catalyst to positive change. In fact, they just cause us to act and think in ways that just further intensify our shame. So now I'm going to tell you about when shame became my identity, which was in middle school. Raise your hand if you look back on middle school fondly. I obviously can't see you, but I'm guessing that not many of you have your hands raised. Middle schools for most, I think, are not our golden days, especially for girls. For me, that would be an understatement. Middle school fucking sucked. Like I said in the prior episode, by the time I got to middle school, I was sleeping in my own bed again, and I could successfully attend a sleepover. But I began to act out in other ways that fulfilled this underlying belief that there was something inherently wrong with me. And it would be a particular incident in the 7th grade that would cause me to fully internalize shame as my identity.
Shame on you if you can't pass through. I said shame on you.
It was a Friday night. It was actually the first night of Christmas break. And me and my friend, we'll call her Sally, we get invited to a high school party via AIM. I think that my screen name at the time was Peach 7 Girl, because my favorite fruit was peach and my favorite number was 7 and I was a girl. Super cool. So to provide a little context, I wouldn't say that Sally and I were the bad girls, but we were the more mature girls in our grade. The first to get our periods, the first to kiss a boy, the first to get drunk, the first to smoke a cigarette, the girls who were scantily dressed at dances. Our parents would drop us off at the dance. We'd be wearing polos and jeans. And as soon as we got inside, we would strip down to the clothes that we had hidden underneath, which were clothes that we had bought from a store at the mall called Bang Bang. I'm sure you can imagine what these outfits looked like. And sometimes even I would stuff my bra with socks. I remember this one time, and I can't believe I'm going to share this story publicly, but so there was one time I'm at the dance, my bra is stuffed with a few pairs of socks and I'm grinding with this guy. I think it was probably to What's Your Fantasy by Ludacris. And we're grinding, and then all of a sudden his hands slide up from my waist and go on top of my boobs, and we're grinding, and he is going to second base over my clothes. And all I remember thinking was, God, I really hope that he doesn't have a lot of experience going to second base so that he doesn't realize that he's actually squeezing socks right now and not actual boobs. So back to that night. So we were spending the night at Sally's that night because we knew we could sneak out of her house. We had done it before. So as soon as we saw the light go off in her parents' room, we are out the dining room window with a plastic bag in tow with Smirnoff Ice bottles that I'd stolen from the house that I had babysat at earlier that evening. Yes, I was a great babysitter. The party was about a 15-minute walk away. It was at this girl's house she actually lived at a clergy house at a Methodist church. Her dad wasn't the rector. They were just renting it. So as fate would have it, as soon as we arrive, we find out that the party had already been busted by the cops. And the only people left were the girls whose house it was and five ninth grade boys from our school. And these were not just any boys. These boys we had been obsessed with since the beginning of middle school. These were the popular 8th grade boys when we were in the 6th grade. And my friends and I, we each had our own designated boy and we granted them a nickname. I really wish I could remember them all. I want to say that my guy, who was rather pale, I think his nickname was Ghost. But what I do remember is that somehow these guys found out about our nicknames. And so they decided to return the favor, with mine being Awkwardly Tall Girl. Yes, Awkwardly Tall Girl. Just what every middle school girl wants to be called by the boys she has a crush on. Thankfully, I don't think it really left a scar. I think it's fucking hilarious today, so feel free to call me Awkwardly Tall Girl if you'd like. So we weren't allowed to go into the house. So we kind of moseyed on over to this stone overpass of the church, and we're hanging out, we're drinking our Smirnoff Ice bottles, and before I know it, Sally and I are both on our knees. And I was giving my first blowjob ever to one of these 9th grade boys, and Sally was right next to me doing the same to another one of the boys. And the other boys and the girls whose house it was were standing there watching. Now, here's the thing. We were not peer pressured into doing this. The boys obviously weren't discouraging it. What 9th grade boy would discourage a blowjob? But this was very much a choice on our part. We wanted to do this. Why? Because we truly thought that it would make us cool. But then the exact opposite thing happened. By the time we got back to school in January, the entire school knew about this. It was a private school that went from kindergarten to 12th grade. So when I say everyone, I mean everyone in middle school, everyone in high school, everyone in elementary school that had a sibling in middle school and high school, all of their parents, and the teachers. And nobody thought we were cool. They all thought that we were sluts. And Sally and I were harassed on a daily basis. Picture that scene from Game of Thrones where Cersei is walking down that cobblestone fucking path and everyone is like, shame, shame, shame. That was my life on a daily basis for the rest of the school year. And I actually had it a lot worse than Sally because Sally had a brother in the 10th grade and eventually he kind of stepped in and defended her. So people laid off, but not me. I didn't have any older siblings and the harassment continued. And I became the girl that no one wanted to be friends with. I became the girl that no one was allowed to be friends with. I had already lost my other best friend at the beginning of the year after my mom caught us drinking together. And even Sally didn't want to be associated with me anymore. And it was then that shame became my identity. That was when I no longer felt shame. And I believed I was shame. And this belief that I was unworthy of connection was really, really ingrained in me subconsciously. So there's a book called Healing the Shame That Binds Us. It's by John Bradshaw. It's like one of the most well-known and acknowledged books on shame. And he explains that the moment shame is internalized is the moment that our true selves go into hiding and a false self is created. And this false self can go one of two ways. The first is shameful acting out or an attempt to be less than human. This is when the child leans into this belief that they are inherently flawed and acts accordingly. The other option is shameless acting in, an attempt to be more than human, when the child tries to be perfect in order to cover up their feelings of being flawed. So what did my 7th grade self do in response to essentially becoming the friendless school slut overnight? Well, I took the less than human route. I took the shameful acting out route. I started smoking pot. I started sneaking out of the house at night. Eventually, my parents found out and they put a security system on the house to keep me in, not to keep people out. I had my first blackout, which would become a regular occurrence for me. I lost my virginity. I let half my class fill me up in the back of a coach bus on a class trip to Gettysburg. Honestly, this is one of the most shameful memories I have that creates a visceral reaction. Maybe because I was so flat chested and no, I didn't have socks stuffed in my bra at this point. My grades plummeted and I was suspended twice, once for forging my mom's signature on a note and the other time for stealing a bowl of tortellini from the cafeteria. And at the end of the school year, I was informed that it would be best if I did not return the following year to that school. And I started 8th grade the next year at public school, where thankfully my slut reputation didn't follow me. However, it would only take a few months before I would earn the nickname Rehab Girl, which you'll get to hear about next week, and all about the hot mess express I was and why the entire world should be grateful that Andrea is sober. But what I want to talk about is, just how I was oblivious to the true impact my childhood had on me. The same goes for this situation. I did not realize the long-term ramifications this experience had on me. What I now know is that toxic shame permeated from my core for the next 15 years. And I carried this experience and the belief that I was unworthy of connection into various situations and various relationships, which would just essentially manifest it into my reality, which would just reaffirm this belief and intensify the toxic shame within. And this is what we call a shame spiral. The initial shaming incident is relived internally over and over, causing our sense of shame to deepen and keeps us stuck in destructive thought and behavior patterns. And in my case, and I think for many others, I didn't have a fucking clue that this was going on. But what I want to convey is that it is possible to break free of the chains of toxic shame. I've spent the past several years working on my toxic shame and other issues with my therapist. And it was about a year ago, before all this COVID madness, I lived in San Francisco and I went to a sports bar. It was the Philadelphia Eagles sports bar where everyone from Philly goes to watch the game. And I was going to meet a friend there. And I walked into the bar and I sat down and I realized that sitting at the table next to me was 7 people that were in my grade at the 7th grade at that school. People who I don't think I had seen since that last day of 7th grade when I was asked to not return. And, it was like I had very nice conversations with them, and it was actually really nice to see them and just kind of talked about what we were up to and how we ended up in San Francisco and all that stuff. And it wasn't until I was in the lift on my way home from the sports bar that I realized that not once had the blowjob incident come to mind while I was talking to them. And that was just such a really amazing experience to just realize that that experience didn't have the power over me that it once did. And that this belief that I'm the girl that no one wants to be friends with, that I'm the 7th grade slut, all that stuff, it not once came to mind. It was no longer a part of my identity. So I hope you all can take that as hope that if you are suffering from toxic shame, that it is possible to overcome it. So that's enough out of me for now. It is now time to talk to my friend Emily, who will be telling us about her experience with toxic shame. And I just want to say that the audio at certain points is not the best. You may hear her newborn crying in the background. Regardless, it is still a juicy, interesting, and fabulous conversation. So here we go. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce my dear, dear friend, Emily, who we actually first met at an AA meeting. It's called Once a Drunk Whore. And I remember it was actually right when I was hitting, it was right after Brian number 1. So my first little bottom at 7 years. And I remember I spoke and I can't remember so there's a portion where people can ask questions. And I remember that you asked me you didn't mean to be rude or anything, but it was a snarky question. I remember thinking, I really like this girl. And I think you maybe came up to me at the end and said, I think you came up to me afterwards and were like, I hope that didn't come across as like rude.
And then since then we've had snarky questions going back and forth, and it will happen in infinity.
Yes. Yeah. And now you're a mom. That was actually right when you first started dating your wife. And now here you are. You're a new mama.
Yeah. So that was probably maybe like 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. Yeah. Life has changed drastically since then.
So I thought, well, we could do similar to the meeting that, we met at, where somebody talks, and you don't have to talk for 10 minutes straight, but somebody picks a relationship of their choice. And so I thought that you could share a little bit about your relationship with shame, in particular in your upbringing, in home, with being gay, growing up in such a religious household? What are your thoughts on there? Wherever you want to go.
Well, it's been interesting. First of all, I came out around the same time I got sober. And
which was at what age?
That was when I was 30.
Wow.
It was really, really tough. I'd say 2 years. I was really depressed. I was really confused. I was just coming out of the cloud, and in my mind, I thought that being attracted to women and, drinking and using in excess fell into the same bucket. I thought they were both things that I wouldn't allow myself to do before and could control, but then let myself kind of slip and fall into, as my willpower decreased. And so when I started the process of unraveling everything, it was just so messy. And so, I had to focus on getting sober first. You take them as they're killing you, is what my sponsor used to say. So I had to stop the drugs, which I got to a point where I was using anything that, was put in front of me, basically. Mm-hmm. But I did have a pretty extensive Coke habit for a while. But I identified just as an alcoholic because the drinking was where it started and where it ended. But once I took all of that away, for instance, I just had to stop going to church. And I really haven't had the desire to go back. And when I even walk into a church for a wedding, even, or when I go home to visit my family, my dad is a pastor of an evangelical megachurch in Indiana. So sometimes when we go home, if it's over a weekend, then he's probably preaching, and going there, it's, I still get really emotional. Like I'll hear songs that, it's like I have such mixed emotions. I miss the music sometimes, and I miss the familiar, faces and sounds. But it was also so damaging to me and really brought me to a really dangerous low point emotionally in my life. I didn't want to live any longer because of the conflicting sides of my life and my, the beliefs that I was brought up to think were the truth with a capital T, but then what I couldn't deny inside of myself, which was that I was definitely attracted to women. I put the question of religion and what role, if any, it should play in my life, or just spirituality, or just addressing, basically unpacking what I had been through. I've really put that on the shelf since I got sober. So this is a really interesting time to be talking about this stuff because I haven't even felt like I have the emotional bandwidth to deal with it.
Well, 2 questions. When did you first realize that perhaps you were attracted to women? And also 2, do you remember learning about homosexuality, like being gay? Do you remember when you first kind of learned about that as a kid?
Yeah. I'll take the second part first. So just growing up in Indiana, I didn't even know what gay was until later than you would think, probably sometime in late junior high.
Okay.
I didn't know there was such a thing as same-sex attraction or partnership. And I remember there was one guy in the show choir that was my older brother's age, that he was gay, and he was probably the first person I'd ever heard of that was gay. And it was just talked about in a very, very negative way within my family. My parents would kind of make fun of gay people. They would describe, I didn't even know there were gay women for a long time, actually. It was only gay men at first. And they were portrayed by the people I knew as very manipulative. They would prey on victims that were susceptible to being taken in, so it was I thought all gay men were very, very lost, very evil people. And they would lure in young boys and then flip them and then bring them into their environment, and cut them off from their family. Yes. Very calculated and very manipulative. And so that's what I thought gay men were just these very evil, very manipulative, dark people. And then once I learned about, oh, there are these like gay women called lesbians, I thought they were just women who were, I mean, I hate to say it, but this is what I was told. Like they were too fat and too ugly to find a man. And so they just ended up with each other. So, and then I remember hearing about, I had an uncle, not by blood, but he married an aunt of mine who they divorced. And then we found out he was gay and we would make fun of him. And I remember my mom being angry with her sister for even talking to him, having any kind of relationship with him. And so it was just obviously my perception and the perception of everyone around me basically was that it was a really, really horrible thing. These were people who were lost and were giving into like sexual sin, which is like the worst kind in the world. It's very like shameful. It was almost worse because they call it like living in sin. It's not like you rob a bank and then you're done. Like, you've committed the sin. It's like you wake up every day, like with being gay. And so it's like a constant, like part of your identity. And it's a choice that you're turning away from God is what they would, the phrase they would use. And so that was what I grew up with. And then the other interesting kind of side to it is that all the while, an aunt that I had, my dad's younger sister, who I was very close to, was in the closet because our family, I mean, I hear different reasons. Anyways, I didn't know she was gay. She didn't tell me until I came out to her.
Did your dad know?
Yeah. And according to my aunt, he and my mom said, it's none of their business. Like the kids shouldn't know. When I was in high school, when I was in college, when I was in my 20s, they still didn't think I should know. Apparently, like I couldn't handle it or something.
Did they still have a relationship with her?
They do. And it's like
they did still. Uh-huh.
It's a healing process. She moved away and fortunately kind of got out of like the conservative bubble of Indiana, and she lives in Washington State now and is able to like live her like full life there in a community where she's loved and accepted. I don't know how she survived like the way that she did, like in the closet for decades. So anyways, that was kind of the background of what I thought about, was told to think about anyone who was gay and the gay community. And then it was in my late 20s when I started noticing. It was so weird. Like there was absolutely nothing conscious about it. I was drawn to certain like TV shows and certain people. Like I was living in LA at the time and working as a young attorney. And like there was a lesbian that I worked with, and my trainer was gay. And so I think what was also happening is that, as it happens in many people's lives, your views change once it becomes personal. So once you know someone and you're like, hey, they're not some disgusting, sex craving, manipulative person. They're a normal person, like there's nothing different about them. And in fact, they might have more empathy and they might be more kind because of the difficulty they've had in being accepted themselves. So what I started noticing also at the same time is that I just was not having any luck with guys. I mean, I would like date and I would hook up, I was like, I was in LA at the time. And can you hear Levi?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if that's a good soundtrack or not, but so the longest that I dated anyone before that time was like, I dated a guy for like 4 months, and it didn't matter that much. I wasn't drawn to them. And I had guys tell me like, hey, it just seems like you don't need me. Like, something wasn't clicking. But it was also at the same time I was starting to drink and use more. And so things are just getting really blurry and really messy too. So long story short, I was also working at a really intense law firm down there, and I had this long trial, and it got really messy because I ended up hooking up with the trial partner, and it was so messy, but it ended up well. It was
It was a guy, right?
a guy, and I was just living this very stringent life. I was very regimented in what I ate and like working out twice a day. And I worked, sometimes 70, 80 hours a week at a law firm, and was just trying so hard to do everything right. And I got to the end of this trial that was just such a mess, but we won, and it was this big victory. And I had kind of reached the pinnacle of what I thought, for my career, like what I was trying to reach, like the goal of going to law school, getting licensed, getting a job, getting a better job, being a part of a big, big high profile trial, winning the trial, and then walking out. And I was like completely miserable. And so at that point, I kind of just started I was just like, fuck it. I can't try any harder, And so that started this several year, it was basically, I was like on a drinking and using binge. That's when I started using a lot. I started partying a lot. I started hooking up a lot. And it was so weird because it wasn't a conscious decision. I think I just reached a threshold of I think I just lost hope in whatever I was doing wasn't working. And so it was just like, okay, here goes. And so that's when I started allowing myself to hook up with girls too.
So had you, prior to that, do you remember like as a kid or like a teenager at all, did you feel shame prior to that?
It's funny, like my first experience with shame that I can remember actually was when I actually was just like, I had a neighbor that I played with, and I remember we would play house, and we would pretend to be characters in soap operas, and I would always be like the guy character, and her mom came in and caught us kissing, and she's obviously a girl, and I was not allowed to play with her anymore. And I remember my mom stopped watching soap operas because she was like, my daughter is picking this stuff up and acting out on it. So it's kind of funny. Like I definitely
we all do that. We all did that.
I know, right? Like it has nothing to do at that age. You don't have like sexual feelings for, but it was definitely not right what I did. I got punished for it. But shame, other than that, gosh, I definitely was a perfectionist. I didn't feel shame from my parents, but I also didn't ever really let them in too much to allow. I probably I felt ashamed and was very, very hard on myself. So anything that I was doing that wasn't kind of within the construct, like the church laid out this kind of like architecture or like this framework for how a life should be lived. And so there is a right way to live and there's a wrong way to live, like you don't have sex before marriage. You follow the 10 commandments. There were definite rights and wrongs. It was very black and white. And so I was trying to figure out how to, and as you get older, it just becomes harder and harder to live within that construct and be like a 20-year-old, living as a normal young adult and trying to maintain those rules. And so that was part of why, looking back, I think that's part of why I started drinking pretty heavily, because what I was aspiring to be, what I thought was like the way I should live my life because of what I was taught, was getting further and further away from what my life was looking like.
Mm-hmm. So what did coming out look like with your parents?
Oh my God. It sucked. It was really hard. It happened on a relapse, and it was interesting. So I'd come out to a lot of people in my life. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I'd actually had a girlfriend for about a year, but my parents still didn't know. They just thought I had the friend that I mentioned every once in a while, but she lived with me. Like we lived together. So I had a deposition by chance in Indiana, like half an hour from where my parents lived.
Wow.
Never happens. So, because my cases are usually in California. So I had a witness I had to depose in like Plainfield, Indiana, which is so weird. And so I flew back there, and this was early in my sobriety. And well, I was about a year into my sobriety. And by the way, I did not want to be, I was not happy to be in AA. I was not happy to get sober at that point. I just didn't know where else to go.
And did they know that they knew that you were in AA and that you were an alcoholic?
I think they did. I don't think I really, really explained it to them because they didn't really see my drinking and using. I was really good at, not showing it to them. Like when my Coke habit got pretty active, I remember coming home one Christmas and just being like, just looking like complete shit and like being really skinny, and I was losing hair, and they were like, wow, you look great. You're so thin. They would have never guessed though. I mean, that's so outside of anything they would have thought I would be into. But anyway, so I went home and my dad was there, and my mom was with my sister who was having her first child, actually the first grandkid. And I relapsed on the plane, and I went home, and then I started sneaking alcohol from my dad, like some whiskey that he had. And when I came out to him, I was actually drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it literally became too painful. Like I couldn't continue to lie, And so I came out to him and I asked if he would not tell my mom until I was actually going to fly back out the next weekend to tell her, because I wanted to tell her in person.
What was his response?
It's funny. At first he said, I felt different growing up and I don't want you to feel like you're not accepted. And, he actually said he thought that he wasn't totally surprised.
Uh-huh.
I was surprised by it because I didn't think there was any. I mean, at the time, I don't know if you remember looking at my driver's license, but I didn't look. There was nothing about my appearance that would have given anything away, and they didn't know anything about my personal life, really.
It must have been that kiss in the, when you're imitating.
Yeah, totally. When I was 4 years old, So that was his initial response. But then I went and I had to work that day. And then I came back and he said, I talked to your mom and she could tell that something was going on. And so I told her. And what I didn't know is that for the next week, my mom, who was with my sister, who had just given birth, was inconsolable, just crying, upset, thinking that, I was my soul, my salvation had been lost, and that, and she was just crying. And then I learned this later, that my sister was so angry at me because she blamed me for coming out at that time and then causing her to have to console my mom when she needed help with a newborn. Yeah. So, and then after that, it was messy. It ended up they wanted me eventually, they wanted me to see a pastor in the church there, that he taught that abstinence was the way, or not abstinence. What's the word? Yeah. Celibacy. Celibacy is the answer to if you're gay and you want to still have live a life, following Jesus. And I refused, and they were disgusted with me, basically. And after that, I was working with a sponsor who suggested that I sever ties with them for a while, which I think was definitely the right thing to do at that time. And then I gotta tell you, Andrea, slowly over time, things turned around. And today, I have an amazing relationship with them, and they love Ashley, and they, my partner, and they have done a complete 180. And the beauty of it is that it wasn't my responsibility for them to change. I think they just saw that they were going to lose any relationship with me, number one. if they maintained their beliefs. And I think our society and our culture, things have changed in the last 10 years too. So that has been helpful. I came out at the right time. Yeah. But it was very, very hard for several years. It was very awkward. And I still didn't want to be gay too. Like, like for myself, like I didn't want to have to deal with it. And like, the other side of it too is that like growing up, like we didn't talk about this kind of stuff. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't talk about things that people didn't want to hear. It was very, very surface when it came to those kinds of topics.
Mm-hmm. So, in closing and kind of wrap this up, do you have any words of advice or any sort of message to those who, might be in a similar situation to where you were?
Oh, gosh. Everyone has such a different journey. I guess just try to be gentle with yourself and try to don't rush things. Don't try to figure it all out at once. Like this stuff, I'm still 10 years later trying to unpack everything. And also, you have to also not place a lot too sizable of blame on the people who brought you up. They were just taught those things too. And just know that like higher power is so big and reveals itself in many different ways to different people. However, their heart accepts it and channels spirituality. So, my parents can have a higher power that looks very different than my higher power, and neither of us is wrong. In fact, it's kind of interesting to learn. You learn more about other people by learning how their higher power works in their life, and just lean on people in your life. Like don't try to figure out on your own. Listen to your heart. Just listen to your heart.
Listen to your heart. I think you're a big inspiration for me, and I just feel really lucky that our paths crossed and that you asked me that snarky message. And yeah, I just think it's so amazing. I think a lot of people in your shoes could carry a lot of, resentment and pain. And I just think it's really beautiful how you've been able to come to terms with all of this and still very much be rooted in compassion and love. So I just want to echo that to you.
Wow. Well, thank you. I'm so glad our paths crossed too. And we've been through a lot together and have learned so much from each other too. And I'm so proud of you for doing this podcast too. You're reaching a lot of people. So really, really amazed by following your heart in that way.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, that wraps up today's episode. I hope you were entertained, but more importantly, I hope you were able to take something away that can help you on your own journey. In the show notes, you will find some resources related to toxic shame if you care to dig deeper. You can find me on Instagram at adultchildpod. Hit a girl up. Next week, you are going to learn why the world is a much better place now that I don't drink. It's going to be raw, it's going to be vulnerable, and I'm excited for y'all to hear it. It's going to be a goodie, I promise.